The accepted label failed the moment the scan found ink where scholars had seen damage. Multispectral imaging gave the AI another version of the fragment, and in that version, the surface carried writing. Under ordinary light, the Dead Sea Scroll piece looked ruined. Dark leather, a broken edge, nothing that could be called a letter with confidence. Then the image stack separated the damaged surface from the behavior of ink. One band showed the injury, another brought out faint strokes. The AI-assisted reading did not declare a lost chapter. It flagged marks that human inspection by itself could not safely defend as letters. That is the pressure point. If erased ink can come back through the right instrument, how much of the scroll record has been unreadable only because people were looking with the wrong eyes? The fragment matters because the Dead Sea Scrolls were never ordinary scraps. They came from caves near Qumran, on the northwest shore of the Dead Sea, where ancient manuscripts survived in a place that should have destroyed almost everything. Hebrew writing, Aramaic writing, biblical texts, sectarian rules, prayers, commentaries, broken pieces from a world still close to the birth of later Judaism and Christianity. That is why a blank-looking fragment is never just blank. It belongs to an archive where a few letters can change how a line is identified, dated, or connected to a known manuscript. The accepted categories look clean in a catalog. Written, unwritten, readable, unreadable. The material is not clean. Many fragments are leather or parchment darkened by time. Some are curled, some are cracked. Some carry salt damage from the region where they survived. Some were handled, flattened, moved, photographed, conserved, and stored before modern imaging existed. A scholar looking at one of these pieces has to make hard judgments from almost nothing. Is that dark mark ink or just the surface? Is that edge a letter or a crack? Is the spacing deliberate or only the accident of a broken scrap? For decades, the safest answer was often restraint. If the eye could not separate ink from leather, and if an ordinary photograph could not raise the contrast, the fragment had little recoverable text. That did not make the piece worthless. It meant the text could not be defended. Here, the record becomes harder to defend. Ink does not fade the same way leather darkens. Multispectral imaging starts with a plain act. The fragment is placed on a stable, non-reflective support. The camera is locked in position. The lights are controlled, so the same surface can be photographed again and again without shifting the object. Then the wavelengths change. Visible light records what a person expects to see. Infrared can move differently across carbon-rich ink and aged skin. Ultraviolet can make surface residues respond in ways ordinary light misses. False color combinations take separate bands and turn weak differences into visible contrast. The point is not decoration, it is separation. A Dead Sea Scroll fragment can look uniform in one image because the eye receives every darkened feature at once. Ink, collagen, salt, abrasion, old stains and shadows collapse into one damaged surface. The image stack pulls those features apart. One band may show a nearly blank patch. Another may isolate darker linear traces. A combined image may make stain-like marks line up into candidate strokes. This is where machine assistance has to enter carefully. The AI is not handed a mystery and invited to invent sacred wording. It is given images of the same physical surface under different conditions. It can compare edges, stroke thickness, spacing, and direction across those layers. Once the machine had separate images of the same surface, the real question became pattern, not color. The ordinary photograph left the old answer standing. No confident writing, no defensible letters, a fragment that could be cataloged as blank, nearly blank, or unreadable without accusing anyone of carelessness. Then the enhanced image changed the pressure. Across the same physical piece, faint marks appeared in a narrow zone where a writing line could have run. They were not strong, they were not clean, they did not hand over a verse, but they repeated in a way damage alone had to explain.
multiple wavelengths, one fragment, one visible light result, one enhanced result. That is the hard anchor. The object did not move. The script did not appear because someone wanted it to appear. The imaging conditions changed and the surface gave a different answer. AI-assisted reading ranks what it sees. It looks for edges that resemble strokes, gaps that resemble letter spacing, and movement patterns that match known manuscript habits. Ancient handwriting is not random pressure. A scribe repeats choices. Curves return.
Upright strokes keep a relation to a baseline. Lines tend to travel with intention. The first output was not a complete hidden passage. It was more dangerous to the old label than that. It was a cluster of ink traces that turned blank into not blank. That should have closed nothing. A dark line is not automatically a letter, and the old explanation deserves one fair test. Surface damage can imitate writing. Cracks can run in dark lines. Fibers can catch light. Edge shadows can look like ink. Mold or conservation residue can create marks that seem deliberate for a moment, especially when a viewer already wants text to appear. That is why the skeptical test matters. A stain wanders. A crack follows weakness in the material. Abrasion spreads according to contact. Edge shadows change with the geometry of the break. Handwriting behaves differently. It tends to respect a line. It repeats pressure. It leaves intervals. It carries habits from one stroke to another. The AI does not force the question closed. It helps sort the candidates. A mark that appears in only one enhancement and disappears under every other band is weaker. A mark that sits outside any possible line is weaker. A mark that crosses fiber and damage without script behavior is weaker. But several traces aligned near the same probable writing path become harder to dismiss. If they keep a shared direction, if they preserve spacing, if their edges respond like ink rather than raised damage, the old answer has to work much harder. The scan cannot prove a lost doctrine from a few marks. It can prove that the label blank may have carried too much confidence. The strongest clue is not one dark stroke. It is the way several marks begin to behave together. Picture the technician at the monitor. The visible light frame is open first because that is the control image. A small Dead Sea Scroll fragment sits against a dark support. The label beside it identifies the piece for the archive. Under ordinary light, the eye crosses a damaged surface and finds no secure line to follow. Then the technician toggles the band. The fragment does not become clean, it becomes less silent. Near one broken edge, a narrow cluster of strokes separates from the surrounding darkness. The pixels are enlarged. Contrast is adjusted. A side-by-side view puts the visible frame beside the enhanced frame, and the difference is no longer just an impression. A manuscript reader joins the image. The caution arrives immediately. Possible ink traces. Candidate strokes. No complete reconstruction. No responsible scholar should jump from a few marks to a finished sentence. But the room has changed. The reader compares the shapes with known Dead Sea Scroll letter forms. Not to force an answer, but to ask whether the strokes behave like ancient writing at all. A short vertical mark matters only if it sits where a vertical mark belongs. A curve matters only if it belongs to a family of curves already known from similar manuscripts. A gap matters only if nearby strokes keep the rhythm of a line. The note is careful because the material is sacred adjacent and historically loaded. Possible ink traces is a small phrase. It does not sound dramatic. Yet inside a manuscript archive, that phrase can move a fragment from empty object to textual witness. That small reclassification opens a larger problem, because one fragment is only the visible edge of a much bigger archive. The hidden mechanism begins in the ink. Many ancient manuscripts used carbon-based ink. Carbon can remain optically different from the writing surface long after the human eye loses the distinction. On leather or parchment,
Ink may sink into tiny structures, cling to fibers, or leave a pattern that survives as a chemical or optical contrast even after the visible line breaks apart. The surface ages in its own way. Collagen darkens. Salt can alter texture.
Flaking removes pieces of the writing layer. Handling can polish high points and dirty low areas. The result can look like one continuous dark field. That is where ordinary inspection loses. The eye sees the whole injury at once. A camera in one band often does the same. Multispectral imaging asks the better question. Not, does this look written under room light, but does any wavelength reveal a difference between possible ink and the damaged support? An eye-assisted reading adds another layer. It can search across the bands for weak edge patterns that persist. It can reduce the visual noise hiding faint strokes. It can compare the shape of a mark against known writing habits without being distracted by the overall ruin of the fragment. This is not magic. It is a disciplined way of asking the material to answer more than once. The scan cannot prove a secret doctrine from a few damaged marks. It cannot turn every dark scrap into scripture. It cannot replace the judgment of manuscript specialists, but it can expose the weakness in an old category. Blank was sometimes a statement about the tool, not the object. That distinction matters because Dead Sea Scroll fragments are often small, disconnected, and wounded. A recovered letter can identify a biblical book. A partial word can connect a fragment to a known column. A line spacing pattern can separate one manuscript from another. A variant reading can show that a text existed in more than one form before later traditions stabilized it. The recovery does not have to be large to matter. If a blank-looking piece preserves 2 or 3 letters, those letters may place it near a passage already known from another fragment. If the strokes do not match the assumed text, they may push the fragment into a different manuscript family. If the spacing is wrong for the old identification, the catalog entry may have to change. That is how sacred textual history often moves. Not through a whole hidden Bible appearing at once, but through a damaged edge, giving enough evidence to make the old description incomplete. The proof object returns here as a model. A fragment that looked silent under ordinary light becomes a warning about every other piece filed too quickly under unreadable. The larger record may not be empty. It may be waiting for the right band of light, the right comparison, and the discipline not to read more than the marks allow. The final implication is not that the machine solved the Dead Sea Scrolls. It is that the archive may still contain text filed under silence. That is what changed everything. The AI-assisted scan did not need to recover a complete chapter. It only had to change the status of the fragment itself. Under one method, the object was damaged and unreadable. Under another, it showed ink behavior that human inspection could not confidently see. That shift is small in wording and large in consequence. A fragment treated as blank can become evidence again. A catalog label can become provisional. A damaged surface can return to the argument, not as fantasy, but as material proof that the old tools did not exhaust what was there. This is the authority reversal. The past record was not necessarily careless, it was limited. Scholars worked with eyes, lamps, lenses, and photographs that could only separate so much. Their caution protected the archive from reckless claims. But caution can also freeze a fragment in the wrong category when the instrument is not strong enough. Machine-assisted imaging narrows what can be dismissed. It says the absence of visible writing is not always the absence of ink. It says darkened leather can carry optical memory. It says erased or damaged strokes may remain physically present, even when ordinary inspection cannot defend them. The danger is obvious. A weak trace can be overread. A sacred manuscript can attract theories the material cannot bear. The only honest path is restraint. The imaging does not license invented verses. It does not prove suppressed doctrine. It does not allow anyone to build a new canon from a few damaged marks. But it does close one escape route. If the scan shows ink-like traces that align, repeat, and respond across wavelengths, the old label cannot simply say blank and walk away. It has to answer the evidence on the object. That is the hidden payoff of the machine reading too much. It read more than the naked eye could defend, but not more than the material was willing to show. Return to the fragment under ordinary light. A dark scrap, a broken edge, a surface that looks finished with its testimony. Then place the enhanced image beside it. The same piece carries traces where silence had been filed. The erased ink changed everything because it changed what unreadable means. So, where do you land? Is this lost wording recovered by better tools, cautious manuscript evidence that needs more testing, or proof that the old catalog closed too early? Leave your theory in the comments and subscribe so you are here when the next hidden record, scan, recovered file, or instrument reading is unsealed.